She took a step back, fear gripping her heart. "What have I done to my husband?" she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. James looked up at her, his eyes pleading for help. "My husband, let me go get help," Sarah said, trying to stay calm. "I'll get you to the hospital, I promise." But as she turned to run, James's voice stopped her. "Sarah, what did you put in the food?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she hesitated, unsure of what to say. Few days ago. Sarah stood by the cooking pot, looking down as her husband, James, shouted at her. "What kind of stew is this?" he asked. "It's not sweet at all." Sarah's hands shook as she stirred the stew. "I try my best, James," she said. James was not happy. "Your best? This food is not even good for our goats." He hit the table with his hand, making Sarah jump. James's words hurt Sarah. She felt like she wasn't good enough. She started to cry. "Why are you crying?" James asked, his voice softer. Sarah wiped her tears. "You always complain about my food. I try my best, but it's never good enough for you." James sighed. "I just want you to cook like your mother. Her food is always delicious." Sarah felt sad. She wished she could cook like her mother, but she didn't know how. James's face turned red with anger. "If you can't cook a decent meal, then maybe you're not worthy of being my wife," he shouted. Sarah trembled with fear. "James, please don't say that," she begged. But James' anger wouldn't subside. "I mean it, Sarah. If you fail to cook a good meal again, I'll throw you out of this house." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had never seen James so angry before. She knew she had to do something to change his mind, but what? Sarah quickly gathered the plates and packed them away, trying to hold back tears. But as soon as she stepped into her room, she burst into bitter sobs. She threw herself onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow. Why did James have to be so cruel? Didn't he know she was trying her best? The tears flowed like a river, and Sarah's body shook with each sob. She felt like her world was crumbling around her. Sarah slowly sat up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I will not cry again," she whispered to herself. "I will show him that I can cook." She took a deep breath, determination burning in her heart. "I will make the best meal I've ever made. James will be proud of me, he will apologize for his words." Sarah's eyes sparkled with newfound resolve. Sarah stood up, grabbed a bag, and walked outside. James was breaking firewood, his face still stern from their earlier argument. Sarah approached him, her heart beating fast. "James, I'm going to the market," she said, trying to sound calm. James looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you need to buy?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I want to get some new food stuff. I'll prepare something good this time, I promise." James raised an eyebrow. "Something good? What makes you think you can do better this time?" Sarah felt a surge of determination. "I'll try my best, James. I won't disappoint you again." She looked him straight in the eye, her voice firm. James snorted, but said nothing more. Sarah turned and walked away, feeling a sense of hope rising within her. She would prove herself, no matter what. As Sarah walked to the market, she prayed silently. "God, please help me. I want to cook a delicious meal for James. I want him to be proud of me." She repeated this prayer over and over, feeling a sense of hope rising within her. At the market, Sarah quickly bought the food stuff she needed. She hurried back home, eager to start cooking. As she walked, she felt a sense of determination. She would not fail this time. She would cook the best meal she had ever made. Sarah arrived home, out of breath but excited. She put down the bag of food stuff and began to unpack it. It was time to start cooking. After a few hours of cooking, Sarah finally finished preparing the meal. She had made a delicious-looking stew with tender meat and fresh vegetables. She carefully placed the stew into a plate and added a side of fluffy rice. Just then, James walked into the house, looking tired from work. He smiled weakly at Sarah and sat down at the table. "I'm starving," he said, rubbing his hands together. Sarah's heart began to beat fast as she placed the plate of food in front of James. She was scared of what he might say. What if the food wasn't good enough? What if he still complained? James looked down at the plate and his eyes widened slightly. He picked up his spoon and took a small bite. Sarah held her breath, waiting for his reaction. James took a bite of the food and his face changed. He looked at Sarah with anger in his eyes. "This is the same bad food," he shouted. "What's wrong with you, Sarah?" Sarah was scared. She took a step back as James slammed his fist on the table. The plates and utensils shook. James was very angry. He grabbed the plate and threw it on the floor. It broke into many pieces. Sarah screamed and moved back, afraid of James. James stood up, his face red with anger. "You can't even cook a simple meal," he shouted. "What kind of wife are you?" Sarah was crying now. She was scared and hurt. She didn't know what to say. James walked over to her, his eyes still angry. "I'm tired of eating this bad food," he said. "I'm going out to eat." Sarah nodded, still crying. She didn't want James to be angry with her. She wanted him to be happy. James looked at her with a stern face. "One more chance," he said. "If you fail again, I will throw you out of my house." Sarah's eyes widened in fear. She knew she had to get it right next time. James walked out of the house, leaving Sarah alone. She sat down on the floor, surrounded by the broken plates and food. She cried and cried, feeling sad and alone. Sarah's tears fell as she knelt on the floor, picking up the broken pieces of plate. She carefully gathered the shards, her hands shaking with sadness. She swept the floor, erasing the evidence of James' anger. As she worked, her mind replayed James' harsh words. "One more chance, or I'll throw you out." Sarah's heart ached with fear and uncertainty. She finished cleaning, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Sarah walked slowly into her room, tears streaming down her face. She fell onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow. "I failed again," she sobbed. She thought about James' words and felt a wave of fear wash over her. She didn't want to lose her marriage. "What do I do?" she cried out, feeling helpless. She remembered James' warning, one more chance. This was her last chance to prove herself. Sarah sat up, wiping her tears with her sleeve. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She would do whatever it took to save her marriage. She would not fail again. Just as Sarah was trying to calm herself down, she heard a knock on the door. She quickly wiped away her tears and opened the door to find her longtime friend, Jennifer, standing with a warm smile. "Hey, girl. How are you?" Jennifer asked, but her smile quickly faded as she took in Sarah's swollen face. "Your face looks like someone's been crying for days. What's wrong?" Sarah tried to brush it off, not wanting to burden her friend with her problems. "It's just allergies, Jen. Don't worry about it." But Jennifer was not buying it. She walked into the house, closing the door behind her, and sat down next to Sarah on the couch. "Come on, Sarah. I've known you since college. I can tell when something's wrong. What's going on?" Sarah sighed, feeling the weight of her secret bearing down on her. She looked at Jennifer, who was watching her with kind, concerned eyes. "It's just, my husband," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer's expression turned sympathetic. "Oh, Sarah. What's going on with James?" Sarah took a deep breath and poured out the whole story, the failed cooking attempts, James' anger and frustration, and the ultimatum he'd given her. Jennifer listened attentively, her face growing more and more concerned. When Sarah finished talking, Jennifer took her hand and gave it a squeeze. "That sounds really tough, Sarah. But I think I might have an idea that could help." Sarah's eyes lit up with hope. "What is it?" Jennifer smiled mischievously. "Well, I've been thinking. Maybe the problem isn't that you're a bad cook, but that you're trying to cook the wrong things. What if we found some recipes that are easy to make and that James would love? Would you be up for that?" Sarah's face brightened with excitement. Yes. That's a great idea, Jen. Let's do it." Sarah's eyes widened in shock as Jennifer revealed her secret ingredient. "You can't be serious," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer nodded, a sly smile spreading across her face. "I'm completely serious. I've used it before, and it makes the food incredibly delicious." Sarah's mind was racing. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But how does it work?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Jennifer leaned in, a conspiratorial look on her face. "I'm not entirely sure. But I think it has something to do with the unique properties of, my menstrual cycle." Sarah's eyes went wide with shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You can't be serious," she repeated, her voice shaking with laughter. Jennifer nodded, her smile growing wider. "I'm completely serious. And trust me, it works like a charm." Sarah was torn. Part of her was horrified by the idea of using such an unconventional ingredient. But another part of her was desperate to save her marriage, and if this was what it took, then so be it. "Okay," Sarah said finally, taking a deep breath. "I'll try it." Jennifer grinned, looking triumphant. "I knew you'd see it my way," she said. As the two friends hugged, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what she had just gotten herself into. Was she really going to use that in her cooking? And what would James think if he found out? But for now, Sarah pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. She was going to save her marriage, no matter what it took. Sarah stood alone, her mind racing with doubts. What if Jennifer's secret ingredient didn't work? What if James still rejected her cooking? She took a deep breath, trying to shake off her fears. "It has to work," she whispered to herself. She checked her calendar, her heart skipping a beat. "My cycle starts tomorrow. I'll use it to make the perfect dish." The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. She waited patiently for her cycle to start, and as soon as it did, she sprang into action. She quickly got to work in the kitchen, following Jennifer's instructions to the letter. As she cooked, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the key to saving her marriage. She carefully added the special ingredient, her heart racing with excitement. As the aroma of the dish filled the kitchen, Sarah's nerves began to settle. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. Now, all she could do was wait and see how James would react. Sarah's hands shook as she carried the plate to the table. James sat waiting, a skeptical look on his face. "I hope you didn't mess it up again," he said, his voice laced with doubt. Sarah's heart sank, but she tried to sound confident. "I'm sure it's delicious, honey," she said, setting the plate down. She tried to meet his eye, but he looked away. James raised an eyebrow. "We'll see," he said, picking up his fork. He took a small bite, his face expressionless. Sarah held her breath, her heart racing. Please like it," she thought, her eyes fixed on James. The silence felt like an eternity as James chewed slowly. Sarah's anxiety grew with each passing second. Would he like it? Would he finally be proud of her cooking? She waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "Wow, you finally got it right," he said, his voice filled with excitement. Sarah's face lit up with joy. She was so happy that James was finally enjoying her cooking. James took another bite, and another, each time praising Sarah on how delicious the food was. Sarah was on cloud 9, she had never felt so happy and proud of herself. But then, suddenly, James's expression changed. He looked like he was in pain, his face scrunched up in discomfort. Sarah's heart sank. What was wrong? James tried to take another bite, but he couldn't. He felt a strange sensation in his stomach, like something was churning and twisting inside him. He tried to push the feeling away, but it only got worse. And then, without warning, James vomited. The food he had just eaten came spewing back out, splattering everywhere. Sarah was shocked, she had never seen James like this before. But James didn't stop vomiting. He kept going, his body convulsing with each heave. Sarah was terrified. What was happening to her husband? She tried to rush to his side, but he pushed her away, his eyes wild with fear. "What's happening to me?" James cried out, his voice hoarse from vomiting. Sarah didn't know, but she knew she had to get him to the hospital, fast. Sarah's eyes widened in horror as she realized she was the cause of James's sudden illness. "We need to get you to the hospital, now," she exclaimed, trying to keep her voice steady. James looked up at her, his face pale and sweaty. "What's wrong with me?" he asked again, his voice weak and trembling. Sarah tried to help him up, but he fell to his knees, clutching his stomach. The food was affecting him, and Sarah knew she had to act fast. She took a step back, fear gripping her heart. "What have I done to my husband?" she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. James looked up at her, his eyes pleading for help. "My husband, let me go get help," Sarah said, trying to stay calm. "I'll get you to the hospital, I promise." But as she turned to run, James's voice stopped her. "Sarah, what did you put in the food?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she hesitated, unsure of what to say.